So, small disclaimer before we get this video going. Unfortunately, my computer likes to run its fan really loud sometimes. I do what I can to get the audio to balance out, but this is just your little disclaimer warning, Kitsus. Welcome back, Kitsus. You have wandered off the path, and that means it is my turn to keep you entertained for a little while. I never thought I was going to say this, but Code Vein 2 is real. It is actually real. When that first trailer dropped, I was floored. I am still floored. I still don't think it is real. Like, after years of silence, after assuming this game was just a one-and-done story, I mean, there's only so many ways it could have continued. Suddenly, 6 years later, we have a sequel. And I am losing it. I am over the moon. I am clinging to the walls like a little gremlin. I am unhinged with excitement. Because I love Code Vein. Like, Code Vein was like, and I know it'll get some shade, but it's like Code Vein was like one of my first introductions to the Souls-like franchise. I love the characters, the story, the combat, even the Lost with their horrific, funky little designs. This game carved itself so deep into me that I'd connect scraps of lore just to keep the story alive. And the second that trailer ended, oh, my brain started firing off those little wheels and gears. It was ticking and going, and that is when a little theory began to take place in my brain. Now, disclaimer, this script was written before the newest trailer and release date reveal happened on September 24th. So what you're about to hear is basically a story/narrative theory area that grew out of those first hints we saw with the very first drop. It's not a canon roadmap. However, it stuck with me, because before we had the concept that it could have been like a reboot, I was wondering, how could Code Vein connect to Code Vein 2 with what we saw? What if it comes down to one question? Who died to let us live? What if the true ending of Code Vein wasn't salvation? Hear me out. What if it wasn't our companions walking into the sunrise, but the sword in the back, the betrayal, the crypt sealing shut? What if the bad ending is what made a sequel even possible? So today, let's follow that red string together. Not just a lore analysis, but a narrative what-if about sacrifice, consequence, and how Code Vein might lead into its sequel in the darkest way possible if given half a chance. So let's be honest here. Every Revenant, every story beat in Code Vein, it is built on sacrifice. The Queen's rampage, Silva binding himself to the throne, the successors walking into their crypts, even the protagonist's own path. Every single thread ends the same way. Somebody doesn't walk away. Somebody pays the bills so everyone else can take one more step. So I don't think the real question should be, in our hypothetical, what ending is canon? It's whose death carried us here. On paper, we have two answers. We have the true ending. It's our hopeful one. I mean, Io, she sacrifices herself. The successors are restored, and you, Louis, Mia, Yakumo, Rin, your entire found family walks out into the sunlight together beyond the Gale of the Mist. It's bright, it's warm, it feels like salvation. And gods, I want this to be canon so badly. I want them to have that sunrise. But here's the problem. That ending will smash straight into the God Eater timeline. Revenants walking free in the outside world just doesn't line up without rewriting everything. And as much as I want it to, it doesn't stitch cleanly into canon for our narrative idea here. So that also means there's option 2, the bad ending. The bad ending, which hurt so badly whenever I did end up playing it. The protagonist takes on too many relics, the body twists, and the queen begins to rise. And Louis, my favorite, he swore he wouldn't betray you, who promised he'd never fail Cruz again. He's the one who drives his blade through your chest, in through the back. You know, killing you to save you, by stabbing you in the back. The exact thing that he promised he wouldn't do the first time you meet. Thanks, Bandai. Hate that. And when the dust settles, Louis takes the throne. The others retreat into their crypts, the Jail of the Mist holds, and the cycle continues. It's easy to label one as good and the other as bad, but let's be honest with ourselves here. If you look closer, both of them demand sacrifice. Both end up with someone chained or dead. Io in one, and you and everyone else in the other. That's the truth of Code Vein. There is no ending without a funeral baked into the bones. But only one of those endings honestly makes sense and gives us space for Code Vein 2. And as much as I hate saying it, as much as I want to give Louis his sunrise, if this story truly continues, then I fully believe in this narrative it would have to be through the bad ending, the heirs ending, because that's the only one where the timeline can, theoretically, stretch forward without colliding headfirst into God Eater. Alright, so let's keep going. We're gonna drag the little red string across our board with our little thumbtacks and see if we can actually pin this down. Because if the bad ending is the bridge here, we need to know when Code Vein happens. And it doesn't just sit in some safe, sealed off little bubble. It honestly bleeds right into God Eater. Most of the timeline stuff that I find is directly because of God Eater. Like, there's not a lot of information about Code Vein, despite Code Vein originally possibly being called God Eater 0, I believe. The point of the matter is that the timelines matter. They always matter. And here's the biggest pin. Yes, we know that Code Vein didn't come out until after the release of God Eater 1, and that's why anything with the moon isn't really going to be something we can say as a factual thing. But again, hypothetical narrative here. It's commonly called the green moon, even though it doesn't really look green to me, but if you've played God Eater, then you know it. It's basically the end of the game, you get the boss, and all that good stuff. But the moon does change. And in Code Vein, the moon is not different, it is not changed, and it's not green. You really can't miss it. So that means that, hypothetically, whatever is happening inside the Gale of the Mist has to end before the moon changes. Or at the absolute latest, it has to happen within the same year, which is 2071. Because if it went any further, you'd look up, see the moon change, and then wonder why nobody in Code Vein ever says anything. So, in this narrative, 2071 is our cutoff. The only solid dates that we have for Project Queen, it hits somewhere around 2050, 56 range. Green Moon's in 2071. And the rest is honestly just me trying to see what I can make sense of for our theory, and also just what we know from the God Eater timeline. So please don't take it as gospel. Now, that said, let's do our hypothetical math. The parasite research begins around 2050-55. Back whenever it was still being researched as a possible alternative to medicine after being originally found as zombification. Then you get the origami and the oracle cells, and by 2056 the God Eater program begins. Right alongside it, theoretically, Project Queen. Cruz gets chosen as the perfect candidate. Not even chosen, because fun fact, Gregorio Silva, who would become the Skull King, is also the head researcher, meaning that Cruz, our lovely Cruz, knew way more than she let on, and she volunteered willingly. And she was a perfect candidate until 2057 when it broke her. Then she frenzies. and the queen screams, and the world splits open like a cracked egg. 1 year later, 2058, Project Queen Slayer succeeds. The queen is killed, and Silva, he takes the relic of the brain. He binds himself to the throne, raises the Jail of the Mist, and with that single act, revenants are erased from history. Not forgotten, like an old story, but actively erased in real time. They are fog-walled away while the rest of humanity keeps turning like you never even existed. So here's where our narrative gets a little bit painful. From 2058 to 2071, it is 13 years, which means if we stretch the timeline all the way to the brink, Silva is holding that jail alone for 13 winters straight. He can't watch anything, he can't do anything, but you know he is aware of it. He's aware of the revenants that die and never come back. He's aware how revenants will lose more and more of themselves with each and every resurrection until nothing remains of themselves. Watching his daughter's shadow burn in the back of his mind every single day as the relic claws and agonizes at him. And you know what? He lasts. He lasts for 13 years because this man was built on sheer willpower and parental guilt. And Bondi, they made him sit there and suffer for over a decade in this hypothetical. Don't we love that? But it does work. It explains everything. Why revenants forget their own history, why decay and erosion feel baked into the system, why Louis later stepping into Silva's role even makes sense. Silva proves that a successor could endure, not just by biology, but by will. He chained himself for 13 years because stopping meant admitting he failed his daughter completely. And when he finally broke, it wasn't even because he gave up. It was because Mito, we have the We Hate Mito fan club over here, get your shirts now. Mito shoves more relics into this man than any revenant could ever hope to carry and survive. And that's not mercy. That's not balance. That's punishment. It's already a bad ending, and we haven't even gotten into the meat of it yet. So, 13 years. That's how long Silva endures. But let's be honest, you don't last that long because the system works. You last because you're chained by something heavier. Love and guilt twisted together. And then, there's Louis. In the bad ending, he's the one who takes Silva's throne. And what does he carry? The exact same chain. Not just love for his sister, but guilt. Guilt that he couldn't save Cruz, guilt that he failed Karen, and finally, guilt that he failed you and everyone else who followed him. So, in the end, what does he do? He kills you. The one person who gave him hope, the one person who pulled him out of despair, and he drives a blade through your heart. The betrayal he said he wasn't capable of. And the cruelty doesn't stop there. Because recently, I got my hands on the Code Vein Memory Echoes manga. It was, to my knowledge, a limited Japan-only print that was bundled with the game for pre-order. And in it, Louis already gets snippets of memory about Cruz, well before he even gets his vestige in the game. And we see how this grief, how these echoes shape him, even before he ever knew the full truth. So think about that. If fragments alone were enough to drive him, to break him, and if we're going to quote Coco, to give him the eyes of a dead fish, what happens when he finally has the full picture? When he remembers everything he couldn't do for Cruz, everything he failed her at, the reason he and Karen died, and then has to live with the fact that you did what he couldn't. You gave Cruz peace through her death, where Louis couldn't even pull the trigger. And then if we want to add another chain, just for the hell of it, he kills you too. You, who saved him, who gave him hope again, who carried his burden where he couldn't. He cuts you down because he couldn't bear to let you become the queen, because you were already gone by the time the bad endings cutscene plays out, and he wasn't going to fail someone again. And then, with all of this guilt pressing down on him, Louis takes Silva's seat. Not out of strength, not out of heroism, but because he feels like he must. Because the throne isn't just a burden anymore. It's punishment. Silva sat there because he couldn't save his daughter. Louis sits there because he couldn't save anyone. 2 men, 2 mirrors. Different bonds, blood and friendship, but chained by the same truth. Guilt heavier than any relic. Silva lasted 13 years on love and grief knotted together. Louis could bind himself even longer, fueled by nothing but guilt. And that's why the bad ending isn't even just possible. It would be inevitable. The cycle continues and the chain holds. Until it breaks. So here's the thing that gnaws at me. We've established Silva held the Gaol in our narrative until 2071. 13 years, chained in grief and love, but then comes the bad ending. Silva's gone, Louis takes the brain, and here's the real question. Why doesn't Louis become the queen right away whenever he frenzies in our hypothetical? Why doesn't he collapse under the weight of relics and frenzy as soon as he has as many as he does? Because, I mean, think about it. You have, 8, 9 relics that get divided up between Louis and the rest of your companions? Well, what if the cruel beauty of it is this? Louis can't become the queen. Not in the same way that Silva could. Not in the way we expect. See, I see 4 possible threads on our little corkboard here. None of them are neat, none of them are certain, but together they explain why Louis possibly doesn't transform into the queen immediately, and why he lingers instead, bound to the throne. In our first theory, we have our critical mass theory. Silva doesn't erupt into frenzy because of time. He erupted because Mito overloaded him with too many relics. That was the tipping point. In the Heirs ending, the relics are divided. Jack, Mia, Yakumo, Louis. Louis himself probably takes 2, maybe 3 at most. Never 4. Never 5. He doesn't cross the invisible line, which means he can't mutate into a new queen. He just decays. Slowly. Quietly. Second one is the weight of his will. Louis' entire life, from the moment he becomes a revenant, is built on failure. Cruz, Karen, and now you. His will isn't heroic, it is poisoned by guilt. And when he takes the throne, it's not out of hope. It's punishment. Every day the Gaol still holds is another lash, another reminder that he failed. He doesn't cling because he's strong. He's clinging because guilt won't let him let go. Another possibility is that Silva was just an anomaly. Silva wasn't like anyone else. Maybe his blood code could call the relics. Or maybe he just could. I mean, blood codes are unique to each individual revenant. So maybe that's what made the Skull King so much of a threat. That when he finally broke, it wasn't a quiet fade, it was an eruption. And in this one, Louis just doesn't have the anomaly to summon all the relics from beyond the crypt. He inherits the relic of the brain, yes, but he can't summon the other relics. He can't become a queen, not because he doesn't want to, but because he doesn't have the ability to call the other relics from beyond the crypt and other successors. So, even when Frenzy finally takes him, it isn't spectacular. There's no ascension, no eruption. He just rots in silence, bound to the throne, a jailer and nothing more. And finally, there's number 4, which could technically just be a rehash of number 2, but not for the same way. It is just the one thing to remember that we also see whenever we look at Nicola. Nicola's whole thing was to be a knight to protect Mia. It's how he fended off Frenzy for so long. So what if, in this most tragic of possibilities, what if even Frenzy cannot burn the vow out of Louis? What if the only instinct carved deep enough to survive Frenzy is leave this to me? It is, there will never be a queen again. So even hollowed, even mindless, Louis still clutches that chain until his hands are bleeding. He doesn't summon the queen, he doesn't collapse the system, he just binds forever. A revenant reduced to an echo. So which is it? Honestly? Maybe one? Maybe all of them twisted together? That's the beauty of getting to do a little bit of theory and red string and thumbtacks here. It doesn't have to be neat. But whichever way you trace the thread, the shape of it is still ultimately the same. In our narrative, Silva lasts until 2071, breaks spectacularly apart because of whatever reason, and then Louis mirrors him, but he lingers longer, not because he's stronger, but because he isn't, because he can't summon the queen, because guilt is a heavier chain than love, and because he just won't let go. And that is the space where Code Vein 2 can exist. That's why the bad ending makes sense, even if it hurts. So let's push this thread forward. Silva lasts until 2071. Louis mirrors him, chained in guilt, all the way until 2087. But here's the thing, the Gaol cannot last forever. And when it falls, it doesn't fall gently. It collapses. Think back to Mito, when he forces Silva to drop the jail. We saw revenants get slaughtered instantly, torn apart, unprepared, erased by the sudden appearance of just one Aragami. That's what collapse will look like. Not a door opening, but a wall shattering. And when Louis finally falters after nearly 20 years of silence, that is what happens again. Revenants inside the Gaol, already worn thin by years of fighting and frenzy, suddenly face not one but a full tide of Aragami. They falter, they die in droves, and outside the fog, what if there were still survivors? Fragments of revenants who never made it back inside before Silva sealed the world away. They've been out there the whole time, starving, mutating, adapting to survive. They're not enough on their own. But when the jail falls, those outside revenants are suddenly reunited with the crumbling society inside the vein. And together, they've hatchworked something new. And this is where our mutation begins, because when revenants and Aragami collide without the jail's buffer, oracle cells meet board parasites in open war, and both systems are designed for one thing: adaptation, devour. Oracle cells consume, boar parasites mutate. When they clash inside a single body, it isn't just death, it's evolution. A forced hybridization. Some revenants frenzy and burn out instantly. Others change. Their blood turns golden. Their power spikes, their hunger shifts. They're not lost, not Aragami, not human. Something new crawls out of the wreckage. Hybrids. And this isn't even the first time this has happened. Mito saw it years earlier during Project Queenslayer. Because remember, the jail didn't exist then. Revenants were still loose, still fighting Aragami in open battle while handling the queen. And when some of them fed on Aragami blood, the reaction was immediate and violent. Parasites frenzied, oracle cells devoured from the inside, and the body twisted into something grotesque. Unstable hybrids, short-lived, more monster than revenant. And if you've played the DLCs, the Hellfire Knight, the Frozen Empress, the Lord of Thunder, you've fought versions of this already, hybrids in all but name. The point being for Mito is that he glimpsed the prototype of what could come later, and he became obsessed. But those early attempts were unstable, wild and out of control. They couldn't last. And when the Gaol went up and the world split, that experiment got trapped in history. The DLC bosses were even sealed away by Jack and an elite team with the previous successor of the Throat before Eva. It isn't even until Louis finally falters, until the jail collapsed decades later, that the conditions return. Revenants and Aragami colliding in the open, blood mingling, parasites adapting under pressure because they do adapt. That's the only reason the Queen's parasite was even a threat. Only this time it wasn't a few test subjects in a lab. It was everyone. A floodgate of evolution forced at once, and what Mita once called horrors became something worse. Stability. Golden-blooded hybrids that didn't burn out immediately. A new species born out of ruin. And the survivors, inside and out, are the ones who build around that consequence. The revenants outside, hardened by decades against Aragami, they bring grit. The revenants inside, eroded by death and memory loss, bring desperation. Together, they consolidate into something fragile, but functional. The revenant houses, not forged in glory, but cobbled together from scraps, clinging to order while the world forgets the Queen, the jail, and the cycle that made them. The jail falls, and from its ruin, the world doesn't get freedom. It gets hybrids, it gets fractured houses, it gets memory decay so deep that the Queen herself is almost forgotten. That's not rebirth, that is survival in scar tissue. And outside the fog, there are still survivors, the revenants that never made it back. They've been out there this whole time, starving, mutating, adapting to survive. Neither side trusts the other, but the collapse forces them together. And here's a good idea of how that could look. The first days or weeks being the scramble. Inside the jail, you have scavenger bands, spring tenders, basically people who would handle blood springs, all shattered and exhausted, half forgotten after endless resurrection, suddenly face a flood they can't contain. And outside the jail, you have the hardened survivors who spent decades fighting Aragami without cover, scarred but unbroken. The first alliances aren't noble. They're desperate bargains screamed in the middle of slaughter. You hold that ramp, I'll drag the civilians back. Don't drink the hybrid blood, and don't hoard the beads. It isn't trust, it's triage. And then in the following weeks to months, you get the mutation. The fall of the jail means that there is blood everywhere. Aragami, revenant, human, frenzies, the lost, parasites that drink whatever they can. And when oracle cells and boar parasites clash inside a body, it isn't just death. Some revenants burn out, their bodies twisting into grotesque frenzy. But others change. They resurrect again and again until the parasite stabilizes the mutation and their blood runs gold. Their hunger twists and their strength spikes. At first, they're treated like contagion, quarantined, purged, and feared. But soon there are too many. The tide is overwhelming, and slowly, unwillingly, the mutation becomes the norm. In the following months to years, you get the first packs. The survivors realize that the scattered bands can't last. They rally at choke points, subway tunnels, fortified skyways, ruined spires turned into strongholds, because Aragami don't stop. Inside revenants bring scraps of whatever disciplines still linger, ration logs, spring tending, fog rituals for any miasma that lingers. And the outside revenants, they bring the knowledge, the skill, the technique against Aragami, how to choke out a swarm, how to retreat without being broken, how not to lose your heart. Together, they draw the first ugly oath. Rules born of desperation, not pride. No hoarding blood, no feeding on the horrors. Mercy kills those that are too far gone. The same rules, and yet entirely new. And in the following years to decades, we get our bands forming houses. Over time, these bands, they ossify, they work with springs, and stable leaders become centers. Smaller groups orbit them. Symbols and names emerge, not legacies, just marks of survival. Follow the crow sigil, it means water, or the wolf means it's a safe perimeter. Memory decay does the rest. The queen fades into myth. Silva becomes the warden. Louis becomes the last keeper for those who knew him. And the jail becomes the long fog. Not erased on purpose, just drowned out by too many deaths, too much forgetting. And what's left are the houses, fractured, brittle, but functional enough to endure. Not built on triumph, but once more built on scar tissue. By the time Code Vein 2 begins, the world isn't Revenants versus Lost anymore. It's houses versus horrors. Golden blood isn't questioned, it's the default. And survival isn't freedom, it's just the next cage. By the time Code Vein 2 begins, the world is already scarred. Household fractured territory, golden blood being the norm, Revenants cling to scraps of ritual just to survive. It isn't freedom. And then, Lou enters the story. Because Lou doesn't just fight in the present, she drags you into the past, and not by accident, but by choice. You move freely between centuries, 1 foot in the crumbling present and 1 in the scarred past, fighting the resurgence where it blooms today and digging for its root where it first began. And the past you arrive in, it isn't raw chaos. The houses have already been established, golden blood is already default. Revenants have already been dying, reviving, and codifying their laws for decades. This isn't the birth of survival, it's the aftermath hardened into doctrine. That's where the root lies, not in the collapse, but in the scarred stability that followed. Lou takes you back because the resurgence isn't a sudden spark, it's a wound that's been festering for a century. If you want to stop the lunar rapaces from consuming everything, you have to cut the infection out where it began. That's how you always do it. But the present still matters, because while you're carving out the root in the House's era, Revenants in your own time are already deforming. The resurgence is happening on both fronts, in both worlds, in past and present. And both must be fought if the world is going to survive. That's the structure of Code Vein 2, you see? The resurgence is the calamity. The Luna Rapacis is its omen, and Lou gives you the power to walk both roads, the scarred one behind and the collapsing one ahead. And if you think that I'm done, no. If you think I'm done, we're not. Let's imagine it. You tear the resurgence out by the root. You and Lou do what no Revenant before could. You burn the sickness out of the past itself, and when you return to the present, it almost looks like salvation. The Luna Rapacis fades, the deformities slow, Revenants breathe again. For one fragile heartbeat, the houses stand. For the first time in centuries, the world feels like it might hold. But Code Vein has never let us walk away clean. The silence that follows doesn't feel like peace. It feels like strain, like a bridge sagging under too much weight. If you stand still long enough, you can even hear it. That deep, groaning sound of something built to last forever, finally beginning to break. The crypts were supposed to be eternal. That was the whole point. The successors weren't just hosts, they were locks. living coffins designed to contain the Queen's relics until the end of time. Mia, Jack, Giacomo, Louis. They gave themselves willingly, entombed in cages of flesh and blood because they believed their sacrifice could be forever. That was the promise, eternity. And that was the lie, because eternity was never real. Flesh decays, memory rots, and parasites. Parasites and all. And when you tore the root out of the past, when you burned it, the echoes carry forward. It wasn't a choice you even made. It probably isn't even something that could be avoided. It was just consequence. Scar tissue pulled apart until the wound bled again. Locks that were never meant to flex, straining under pressure they couldn't withstand. The crypts split, the seals bleed, and one by one your family crawls out of the eternity they had promised you. But they don't return as themselves. They don't return as the family you love. The successors who rise, they are not Mia, Jack, Giacomo, or Louis. They are frenzied, hollowed, their flesh split apart, their voices mangled into static, their eyes glowing with hunger and blood. They stagger not to embrace you, but to bleed themselves back into the Queen. The jail once stretched that hunger thin, kept the relics scattered. But with the jail gone and the locks shattered, the reunion is horribly swift. You watch your companions dissolve not into ash, but into the very thing you fought to bury. And Louis? Oh, my favorite man. He's the knife that cuts the deepest. He killed you once already in the bad ending. He swore he wouldn't betray you, and then he drove his blade through your back, because he needed to not fail again. He needed to make sure you didn't suffer. And afterwards, he chained himself willingly, took Silva's place, and bore the relics for a century. He and everyone else carried the guilt, the burden, the silence, but when his crypt cracks open and his body staggers free, there is nothing of Louis left. Only frenzy wearing his skin. Only the relic hollowing out the man who once smiled at you over a candy bar back in base, who once promised he'd carry the weight so you didn't have to. And when his relic bleeds into the hollow left behind, the shape of the Queen begins to form. And this is when the horror turns absolute. Because the Queen does not reform as Cruz. Cruz is gone. Cruz died the day her body was cut into pieces. No, she died the day you failed and the attendants died. That story is finished. What reforms now isn't Cruz at all. It's the Queen itself, perfected by centuries of silence, sharpened by absence, refined by hunger. And when it knits itself back together, it does not wear the face of a daughter. It wears the last mask it ever wore. The protagonist of the first Code Vein. The Revenant you played, the one Louis killed, the one the companions entombed themselves to honor the memory of. The Queen comes back wearing their face, your face. And that's why this theory only works if the bad ending is canon for our narrative. In the true ending, Io's sacrifice restores balance. The successors are freed and the protagonist walks into the sunrise with Louis and everyone else. No crypts, no ticking locks, no face left for the parasite to wear. But in the bad ending, blood runs gold. The Queen revives with your face, and your family sacrifices everything, not for eternity, but only for a delayed end. Because in the end, the locks break, and eternity itself rots into ash on the Queen's tongue. That's the final cruelty. You, in the sequel, stopped the resurgence. You saved the present, and in doing so, you shattered the crypts, the coffins that were meant to last forever. And as those fragments bind back together, the Queen returns not as cruise, not as tragedy, but as the parasite itself, perfected by centuries of rage, wearing the face of the revenant you once were. The resurgence was only the warning. The Queen is the end. Wouldn't that be something? If even after all the sacrifice, all the cages, the scars, the final thing the world sees is the Queen staring back through the eyes of the protagonist. And wouldn't it be worse still if even then, centuries later, she still couldn't die? And that's where this whole little red string of mine leads, actually. It's to a truth that isn't going to be canon, it's just a nice little hypothetical narrative. With everything we know, Code Vein is almost certainly a soft reboot. A clean slate. A way for Revenants to stand on their own without timelines or ties to God Eater. The narratives don't connect, and honestly that's fine. But if they had, if the first game truly bled into the second, then I just laid out an entire reason why I don't think it could have ever been through the sunrise. It couldn't have been through Eve's gentle sacrifice, or through the true ending's promise of peace. No, it would have had to have been through the bad ending, through the protagonist's death, through Louis' mercy. A blade through your back, not because he wanted to betray you, but because he couldn't let you become a monster. Because he couldn't fail again. Through the eternity of crypts and coffins that were never really eternal at all. And if that were the case, then Code Vein 2 wouldn't just be a sequel. It would be a requiem. Every lock breaking, every sacrifice unraveling until the Queen returned, not as cruise, not as memory, but you? That's the story I see when I trace the strings. Tragic. Bleeding. A cycle where even after all the cages and the scars and the funerals, it is the parasite that ultimately still wins. Where every answer to the question, who died to let us live, is the same. All of them. And even then, it was never enough. Thanks for joining me today, my Kitsus. Be sure to like and subscribe if you liked the video, and until next time, stay wild, stay sharp, and please, please, please stay hydrated.